I'm Madison Hayes, 26 years old, and for most of my adult life, I've been nothing more than an unpaid maid in my parents' home. Cooking breakfast at dawn, scrubbing bathrooms until my hands cracked, and folding laundry until midnight while they lounged and criticized my efforts. My grandfather William was the only one who saw my worth beyond dishwasher and duster. When he passed away last month, I was devastated, but I never expected his funeral would completely transform my life. Before I tell you what happened at my grandfather's funeral that changed everything, let me know where you're watching from and don't forget to like and subscribe if family drama stories resonate with you. My childhood wasn't always like this. There was a time when our family functioned normally, when I was treated like a daughter instead of household staff. Until I was about 12, my parents, Richard and Eleanor Hayes, were typical middle-class working parents. Dad worked in finance, Mom was a marketing associate, and I was just a regular kid with regular responsibilities, keeping my room clean, taking out the trash occasionally, and helping with dishes after dinner. Everything changed when Mom received a massive promotion that catapulted her into upper management. Suddenly, appearances became everything. Our modest home in a quiet neighborhood wasn't enough anymore. We moved to an imposing colonial in the right part of town, a house that required significantly more upkeep. Mom started hosting dinner parties for her colleagues and Dad's clients. The pressure to present a perfect home intensified. "Madison, I need the living room spotless before the Robertsons arrive," became Mom's standard greeting after school. "And make sure you polish the silver, not like last time." At first, I didn't mind the extra chores. I was proud to help, especially seeing how stressed Mom was with her new position. Dad, always the more laid-back parent, seemed to withdraw as Mom's ambition grew. He retreated into his study when he wasn't working, leaving me alone to handle Mom's escalating demands. By 14, I was preparing multi-course dinners for their guests while completing honors homework. By 16, I was managing the entire household, planning meals, doing grocery shopping, scheduling maintenance for the house, and even coordinating their dry cleaning pickups. "Madison, don't forget to call the landscapers. The Johnsons complain that our hedges are overgrown," Mom would say over breakfast, not looking up from her phone. "And while you're at it," Dad would add, passing me his coffee mug for a refill, "could you pick up my prescription? Oh, and the car needs an oil change." My daily routine became a marathon of servitude. I'd wake at 5:30 a.m. to prepare their breakfasts, Dad's eggs exactly over medium with rye toast, Mom's protein smoothie with precisely 7 almonds on the side. Then I'd clean the kitchen, start laundry, and rush to school. After school meant grocery shopping, more cleaning, dinner preparation, and homework squeezed in between loads of laundry and ironing Dad's shirts. Weekends weren't for friends or relaxation, they were for deep cleaning the house, meal prepping for the week, and whatever special projects Mom had devised. The guest bathroom tiles need rerouting, or all the curtains need to be taken down and washed, became my Saturday morning wake-up calls. Once, during my junior year of high school, I tried to establish boundaries. My photography teacher had selected me for a weekend workshop, a rare honor and my first real chance to develop my secret passion. "I can't clean this weekend," I announced at dinner, heart pounding. I'd been selected for this photography workshop and Mom's laugh cut me off. "Photography? What a waste of time. We need the pantry reorganized this weekend." "But this is important to me," I insisted. "Mr. Peters says I have real talent." "More important than family?" Dad interjected, his tone making clear which answer was acceptable. "We've given you everything, Madison," Mom added. "This roof over your head, the clothes on your back. Is it really too much to ask for some help around the house?" That night, I cried myself to sleep. I called my teacher the next day to decline the opportunity. Why did I stay? The question tormented me through college years, which I attended locally because moving away would be too expensive and who would help around the house. Financial dependence was the primary chain. My parents controlled all aspects of my finances. My bank account was a joint account with Mom as the primary holder. Any money I made from occasional babysitting or tutoring went into this account, which she monitored closely. "We're putting a roof over your head and food in your mouth," was the standard response when I brought up moving out. "Do you have any idea how expensive apartments are? You couldn't possibly afford it." Beyond the financial control was the masterful emotional manipulation. Any expression of independence was met with guilt trips about family loyalty, gratitude, and obligation. "After all we've sacrificed for you," was Dad's favorite line, though I could never identify these supposed sacrifices. "Family helps family," Mom would say. "I don't know why you're being so selfish." The only respite in this existence was my grandfather William, Dad's father. After Grandma passed when I was 15, Grandpa lived alone about 20 minutes away. Every Sunday afternoon, I'd visit him, usually bringing along some homemade food under the guise of checking on him for my parents. In reality, those visits were my sanctuary. Grandpa's modest two-bedroom house became the one place I could breathe. Unlike his son, Grandpa saw what was happening and expressed his concern. "You look tired, Maddie," he'd say, using his special nickname for me. "They're working you too hard." In his living room, surrounded by books and the scent of pipe tobacco, I could be myself. He encouraged my photography, even giving me his old Nikon camera when he noticed my interest. While my parents dismissed my artistic pursuits, Grandpa hung my photos on his walls with pride. "You've got an eye, Maddie," he'd say, studying my latest shots. "You see beauty where others don't look." He was the only one who asked about my dreams, my thoughts, my feelings. In those precious Sunday hours, I wasn't the help, I was a person with value beyond my usefulness. "You know, your grandmother was a painter," he told me once, showing me her old watercolors. "She'd be proud to see how you've inherited her artistic spirit." I kept a small portfolio hidden in my room, filled with photographs I'd taken during stolen moments, early mornings when I'd slip out before dawn to capture the sunrise, or detours on errand runs to snap interesting architecture or people on the street. Photography became my secret rebellion, my way of proving I existed beyond the walls of that house and the endless chores. The week before Grandpa died was particularly grueling. Mom was hosting a charity committee meeting, which meant the house needed to be immaculate. Dad had clients visiting from overseas, requiring special meals prepared with dietary restrictions I had to research. Between that and my part-time job at the local library, the one small freedom I'd negotiated, I was sleeping barely 4 hours a night. "The baseboards in the dining room need touching up," Mom informed me Wednesday evening. "And the guest towels need to be replaced with the Egyptian cotton set. The committee will be using the powder room." I was on my hands and knees, painting baseboards at midnight when my phone rang. It was Grandpa, which was unusual for that hour. "Just wanted to hear your voice, Maddie," he said, his voice sounding strangely wistful. "You remember what I always tell you? That I'm worth more than what I can do for others," I repeated his mantra. "That's my girl. Never forget it." That was the last time we spoke. The call came 3 days later, early Friday morning. I was in the kitchen, prepping Dad's breakfast while simultaneously ironing Mom's blouse for her morning meeting, when my phone rang. Dad's name flashed on the screen. Madison, his voice sounded different, hollow, almost. "Grandpa's gone. Heart attack sometime during the night. The neighbor found him when he didn't come out for his newspaper." The spatula clattered from my hand. I felt the room tilt and grabbed the counter for support. "What?" I whispered, my throat suddenly tight. "You heard me. He's dead." Dad's voice had an odd flatness to it. "Your mother and I need to handle some things at the hospital. Call the family. And start planning the funeral arrangements, you know how these things work. We'll need food for people coming by the house, too." The line went dead before I could respond. I stood frozen in the kitchen, egg slowly burning in the pan, iron hissing on the blouse I'd forgotten. My grandfather, my only ally, my safe harbor, was gone. And my father's response was to assign me tasks. I moved mechanically through that morning, calling relatives through tears while preparing the food Mom had texted would be appropriate for mourners. When my parents returned home, Mom's first words weren't of comfort. The carpets need vacuuming if people will be coming by, she said, frowning at the floor. And put together a proper tea service. Nothing mismatched. Dad retreated to his study as usual, emerging only to inform me that I'd need to clean out Grandpa's house before it could be sold. We can get a better price if it's emptied quickly, he explained, as if discussing a business transaction rather than his father's home. That night, after finishing the day's tasks, I collapsed onto my bed, grief finally catching up. Not only had I lost the one person who truly saw me, but I wasn't even being allowed to mourn him. Instead, I was tasked with organizing his funeral like it was just another dinner party. The next day, I went to Grandpa's house alone to begin sorting his belongings. Walking into his home, a place that had been my sanctuary for so many years, knowing he wouldn't be there in his worn leather armchair, pipe in hand, broke something inside me. I sank onto the couch and finally let myself sob. After my tears subsided, I began the painful process of boxing up his life. In his bedroom, while gathering his personal items, I found a photo album I'd never seen before. Inside were pictures of me throughout the years, not just the posed family portraits my mother insisted upon, but candid shots of me reading, laughing, and even some of my photography pieces I'd given him. He'd kept everything. Between the pages of the album was an envelope with my name written in his shaky handwriting. With trembling fingers, I opened it. "My dearest Maddie," the letter began. "If you're reading this, I'm no longer here to tell you in person what you mean to me. You have always been more than just my granddaughter, you've been the light of my life, especially after your grandmother passed." Tears blurred my vision as I continued reading. He wrote about how proud he was of my resilience, my kindness, and my talent. Then came the lines that sent a chill through me. "I've watched with growing concern how Richard and Eleanor treat you. No child should be reduced to servitude in their own home. I've made arrangements that I hope will free you from this situation. Trust Thomas Bennett, he'll explain everything after I'm gone. Remember what I've always told you, you are worth more than what you can do for others. It's time you were allowed to discover just how much more." The letter was cryptic, but it hinted at something significant. Who was Thomas Bennett? What arrangements had Grandpa made? I folded the letter carefully and tucked it into my pocket, a small flame of curiosity temporarily burning through the fog of grief. When I returned home that evening, laden with boxes of Grandpa's most personal items I couldn't bear to discard, Mom was waiting with a list of tasks for the funeral. "The service needs to be dignified but not ostentatious," she instructed. "Your father will speak, of course. We've invited the partners from his firm and my executive team. You'll need to arrange appropriate flower arrangements, lilies, not those carnations you suggested for the Henderson funeral last year. Those looked cheap." I stood in the foyer, arms full of my dead grandfather's belongings, my eyes swollen from crying, and she was critiquing flower choices from a funeral 3 years ago. "I haven't had time to grieve," I said quietly, surprising myself with the words. Mom looked genuinely confused. "You can grieve after the arrangements are made. There's too much to do now." That night, I lay awake, rereading Grandpa's letter and wondering what would happen at the funeral tomorrow. For the first time, the embers of resentment began to glow stronger. I'd spent years accepting my role, believing I had no choice. But Grandpa's words echoed in my mind, "You are worth more than what you can do for others." As dawn broke on the day we would lay my grandfather to rest, I felt something shifting inside me. Whatever Grandpa had planned, whatever was coming, I knew one thing for certain, I couldn't continue living as my parents made much longer. St. Mark's Episcopal Church stood solemn and stately against the gray morning sky as mourners filed in for Grandfather William's funeral. I'd been at the church since 7 a.m., coordinating with the minister, arranging the photo displays, and ensuring the flowers, lilies, as Mother insisted, were perfectly positioned. All while my parents slept in, arriving just 30 minutes before the service to avoid unnecessary small talk, as Mom put it. The dark wood pews filled with a mix of faces, some I recognized, others strangers to me. Dad's colleagues in somber suits, Mom's society friends with appropriately subdued expressions, distant relatives I hadn't seen in years. I stood at the entrance, greeting people, directing them to sign the guest book, all while fighting back tears for the one person who had truly cared about me. "Madison, the programs aren't properly centered on the seats," Mom hissed as she swept past me, immaculate in designer black. "Fix it before everyone's seated." I bit my lip and moved to adjust the already perfectly aligned programs, feeling the eyes of several guests on me. Among them was a woman I recognized as Aunt Patricia, Dad's estranged sister who lived across the country. The look she gave me wasn't the typical sympathetic funeral glance, it was something sharper, more assessing. Almost angry, though not at me. As I finished my task, someone touched my arm gently. I turned to find Lily Reynolds, my childhood best friend who had moved away for college and stayed gone, something I'd envied fiercely. "Madison," she embraced me warmly. "I'm so sorry about your grandfather. I came as soon as I heard." The genuine compassion in her voice nearly broke me. When was the last time someone had spoken to me like a person rather than an employee? "Thanks for coming," I managed. "I've missed you. You look exhausted," she whispered, studying my face. "Are you okay?" Before I could answer, Mom appeared again. "Madison, the minister needs the payment check. And the first row isn't reserved properly. Mrs. Winters is sitting where the Petersons should be." Lily's eyes widened slightly as Mom walked away without acknowledging her presence. "Is she always like that with you?" I forced a smile. "I should go fix the seating." The service began, a somber affair with appropriately mournful music and dignified readings. When the time came for eulogies, my father approached the podium, straightening his tie with practiced precision. "My father, William Hayes, was my closest confidant and greatest mentor," he began, his voice carefully modulated for maximum emotional impact. I stared in disbelief. Dad had visited Grandpa maybe 3 times in the past year, usually just to discuss financial matters. They hadn't been close since before I was born, something Grandpa had mentioned with regret during our Sunday visits. "We spent countless hours together, particularly in his final years," Dad continued, rewriting history with every word. "He shaped me into the man I am today, and I strive to make him proud in all my endeavors." A quiet scoff came from Aunt Patricia's direction. Several heads turned, but Dad pressed on, fabricating a relationship that had never existed. As the service concluded and people began moving toward the cemetery for the burial, I found myself cornered by Mom near the flower arrangements. "These lilies are wilting already," she said loudly enough for nearby mourners to hear. "I told you to get them fresh this morning, not yesterday. And your hair looks terrible, couldn't you have done something with it? This is a reflection on our family." Heat rushed to my face as several people paused, pretending not to listen. I caught pitying glances, worse somehow than the criticism itself. "I'm sorry the flowers aren't to your standards while we're burying Grandpa," I whispered, immediately regretting my rare show of defiance. Mom's eyes flashed. "Don't take that tone with me. After everything we've done for you." "Eleanor," a male voice interrupted. We both turned to see an older man in an impeccable suit, leather briefcase in hand. "My condolences on your loss." "Thomas," Mom's demeanor instantly transformed into grieving daughter-in-law. "How kind of you to come." "Thomas Bennett," he introduced himself, extending his hand to me. "Your grandfather's attorney. And you must be Madison." I shook his hand, remembering the name from Grandpa's letter. "Yes, nice to meet you. I need to speak with you privately after the burial," he said, his eyes kind but serious. "William left specific instructions." Mom's posture stiffened. "Anything regarding my father-in-law's affairs can be discussed with my husband and me. Madison is just William's granddaughter," Thomas finished firmly. "And the person he specifically asked me to speak with." As we walked toward the cemetery, I overheard 2 older women, distant cousins of Grandpa's, whispering not quite quietly enough. "Did you see how they treat her? Like the help, not their daughter. William mentioned it when I visited last Christmas. Said it broke his heart to see Eleanor ordering Madison around like a servant. She looks exhausted, poor thing. No wonder William was so concerned." The burial service was mercifully brief, the November wind whipping around us as Grandpa's casket was lowered into the ground beside Grandma's grave. I placed a single white rose on the casket, not part of the official flower arrangement, but a private goodbye between us. As people began to disperse, Thomas Bennet approached me again. "Your grandfather wanted me to give you something," he said quietly, glancing at my parents who were accepting condolences several feet away. "Would you be able to come to the house in an hour for the will reading?" Will reading? I hadn't even considered this aspect. I didn't know I needed to be there. His smile was small but significant. "Oh yes, Madison. Your presence is absolutely essential." Grandpa's house felt different as people gathered in the living room for the will reading, no longer a sanctuary but a stage for what would become the most dramatic confrontation of my life. Mom had insisted on rearranging the furniture to better accommodate everyone, though the real purpose seemed to be erasing Grandpa's presence as quickly as possible. Family members and close friends sat in uncomfortable silence, the social niceties of the funeral giving way to the unspoken question of inheritance. My parents positioned themselves prominently in the center of the room, Mom subtly directing me to stand rather than take one of the remaining seats. "We'll need water for everyone, Madison," she whispered. "And make sure the air conditioning is adjusted. It's stuffy in here." Before I could respond, Thomas Bennet entered from the kitchen where he'd been preparing his documents. He looked at me still standing, then pointedly gestured to an empty armchair next to him. "Madison, please take a seat. We're ready to begin." Mom's lips thinned in disapproval, but I sat down, feeling strangely defiant in this small act of independence. Thomas cleared his throat. "Thank you all for coming. As William Hayes' attorney for the past 30 years, I'll be executing his last will and testament according to his explicit instructions." He opened his briefcase and removed a thick document. William was very specific about how this proceeding should be conducted. The formal legal language washed over me as Thomas began reading the standard preliminaries. I found myself studying the room instead, Aunt Patricia's attentive expression, Dad's impatient finger-tapping, Mom's carefully composed face that didn't quite mask her anticipation. The initial bequests were modest and expected. Grandpa's fishing gear to his longtime friend Gerald. Family photo albums to Aunt Patricia. His collection of first-edition books to his reading club. With each item, I could see my parents' impatience growing. These small items weren't what they were waiting for. "And now to the matter of William's estate," Thomas said, his tone shifting subtly. "Including this house, his investments, and liquid assets totaling approximately $2.3 million. A ripple went through the room. I felt my heart skip. I had no idea Grandpa had that kind of money. He'd lived so modestly. "To my son, Richard Hayes," Thomas read, and Dad sat up straighter, "I leave my collection of vintage watches and the sum of $50,000. Dad's face froze. $50,000 was a considerable sum, but nowhere near the estate's value, and far less than he'd clearly expected. "To my daughter-in-law, Eleanor Hayes," Thomas continued, "I leave my late wife's pearl necklace and the sum of $50,000. Mom's sharp intake of breath was audible across the room. Her fingers clutched her designer handbag so tightly her knuckles whitened. Thomas paused, taking a slow sip of water before continuing. The room was utterly silent. "The remainder of my estate, including this house, my investment portfolio, and the sum of approximately $2 million, I leave to my beloved granddaughter, Madison Hayes." For a moment, I thought I'd misheard. The room seemed to tilt, and I gripped the arms of the chair. "This bequest," Thomas continued, his voice cutting through the shocked silence, "comes with 3 conditions. First, Madison must live independently from her parents. Second, she must use a portion of the inheritance to pursue her passion for photography through education or professional development. Third, she will receive a monthly allowance from the estate for living expenses and education until the age of 30, at which point the remainder of the estate transfers fully to her control." "This is ridiculous." Mom's voice shattered the stunned silence, her face flushing an angry red. "There's obviously been some mistake." Dad stood up, his expression thunderous. My father wouldn't do this. He couldn't possibly have intended to leave everything to Madison. She's just he caught himself before finishing what I suspected would have been just a kid or worse, just the help. Thomas remained unruffled. I assure you, Richard, your father was of completely sound mind when he updated his will 6 months ago. I personally witnessed his signature along with 2 other parties. 6 months ago? Mom's voice rose higher. He changed his will without telling us? That's suspicious in itself. Madison obviously manipulated him. I did no such thing. I found my voice, shock giving way to indignation. Mrs. Hayes, Thomas interjected, his professional demeanor never wavering. William anticipated this reaction. He left a letter explaining his decisions that I'm required to read if his bequests were contested. He removed another envelope from his briefcase. Shall I proceed? Absolutely, Aunt Patricia said before my parents could object. I think we should all hear William's reasoning. Thomas opened the envelope and began reading in Grandpa's familiar, straightforward voice. If this letter is being read, it means Richard and Eleanor are contesting my decision regarding Madison's inheritance. Let me be clear, this decision was made with full mental capacity and after years of careful observation. I have watched my granddaughter be treated not as a beloved child but as an unpaid servant in her own home. I have seen her dreams dismissed, her time and labor exploited, and her spirit systematically crushed by the 2 people who should have nurtured her most. At a family dinner last Christmas, I witnessed Madison serve everyone, clean up alone, and receive nothing but criticism for her efforts. When she mentioned her interest in photography, both Richard and Eleanor mocked her ambitions while continuing to pile household responsibilities on her shoulders. This was not an isolated incident but the culmination of a pattern I've observed for years. My son and his wife have failed in their duty as parents. This inheritance is my attempt to give Madison the freedom they have denied her and the opportunity to discover her own worth beyond what she can do for others. It is not spite but love that motivates this decision, love for my granddaughter and hope for her future. The room fell into stunned silence when Thomas finished reading. I sat frozen, tears streaming down my face, not from sadness but from the overwhelming validation of having my experience finally acknowledged. Mom recovered first, her voice venomous. This is slander. We've given Madison everything, a roof over her head, food, clothes. We've supported her completely. By making her work for it like an indentured servant, Aunt Patricia interjected. Dad saw exactly what was happening, and apparently he decided to do something about it. This will won't stand, Dad declared, standing rigidly. We'll contest it. Madison is clearly not capable of managing this kind of money. Thomas closed his briefcase with a definitive click. You're welcome to try, Mr. Hayes. However, I should inform you that William has been documenting his concerns for years. He kept a detailed record of his observations, including photographs, witness statements from neighbors and family friends, and Madison's work schedule as observed during his visits. He built quite a compelling case for his decision. He's been planning this for years? I whispered, stunned by the revelation. Thomas nodded. William was a meticulous man who loved you very much, Madison. He wanted to ensure you would be taken care of in the way your parents failed to do. Mom stood abruptly. This is absurd. We're leaving. Madison, come. For perhaps the first time in my adult life, I didn't automatically obey. No, I said quietly. I think I'll stay here a while. The look of shocked outrage on her face would have cowed me just hours before. Now, fortified by Grandpa's words and the security he'd provided, I held my ground. This isn't over, Dad warned, his voice low as he steered Mom toward the door. Not by a long shot. As they stormed out, the remaining relatives sat in uncomfortable silence until Aunt Patricia moved to sit beside me. Your grandfather was a wise man, she said, taking my hand. And braver than I've been. I should have said something years ago about how they treated you. In that moment, surrounded by the remnants of my grandfather's life and the new possibilities he'd created for mine, I felt both terrified and hopeful. The confrontation I'd feared for so long had happened, and while the aftermath loomed large and threatening, for the first time I had the resources to face it on my own terms. The drive home was charged with a silence so thick it seemed to compress the air inside the car. Dad gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles whitened, while Mom stared rigidly ahead, her profile sharp with fury. I sat in the back seat, my usual place, like a child or chauffeur, watching suburban houses blur past and wondering if I was heading back to a home or a battlefield. We pulled into the driveway with a jerky stop that betrayed Dad's agitation. The garage door had barely closed behind us when Mom spun around, her composure finally shattering. "How dare you embarrass us like that?" she hissed, her voice trembling with rage. Sitting there accepting that ridiculous will without a word of protest. "What did you expect me to do?" I asked, surprised by the steadiness in my own voice. "You should have refused it." Dad exploded, slamming his hand against the kitchen counter as we entered the house. "Told everyone there was a mistake, that you didn't want or need special treatment." "Special treatment?" The words escaped me before I could filter them. "You mean like being treated as your daughter instead of your housekeeper?" Mom's eyes widened as if I'd slapped her. "After everything we've done for you." "What exactly have you done for me?" The question had been building inside me for years, and now it rushed out like water through a broken dam. "Given me a place to live in exchange for cooking, cleaning, and managing your entire household?" Most parents don't charge their children with endless labor in exchange for basic necessities. "You ungrateful little," Mom stepped toward me, finger pointed accusingly. "We clothed you, fed you, paid for your education." "My community college education that I could only attend part-time because I was too busy running your household to take a full course load," I clarified, backing up against the kitchen island. "The clothes you selected to ensure I looked presentable when your colleagues visited. The food I cooked myself after grocery shopping with the limited budget you allocated." Dad's face darkened to an alarming shade of red. "This is William's doing. He's poisoned you against us from beyond the grave." "Grandpa didn't poison me against you. He was the only one who saw what was happening and tried to help me." I felt tears threatening but forced them back. "He valued me as a person, not as a service provider." "This inheritance is a fantasy," Mom said, her voice turning coldly practical. "You can't possibly manage it. You have no experience with finances or property management. The sensible thing is to let us handle everything." The manipulation was so transparent it almost made me laugh. "That's not going to happen. You'll contest the will with us," Dad stated as if it were already decided. "We'll explain to the court that William was declining mentally, that you took advantage." "I won't be doing that," I interrupted, a strange calm washing over me. "I'm going to honor Grandpa's wishes. Including the part about living independently." A heavy silence followed my declaration. Mom exchanged a glance with Dad, their expressions shifting from anger to calculation. "You're upset." "We understand." Mom's tone changed abruptly, softening to the voice she used with difficult clients. "It's been an emotional day. Let's discuss this tomorrow after you've had time to think rationally." "I am thinking rationally," I said, moving toward the stairs. "I'm going to pack my things." "Pack?" Dad barked out a humorless laugh. "And go where, exactly?" "You have nowhere to go." "I have Grandpa's house," I reminded him, already climbing the stairs. "My house now." I could hear them following me, their footsteps heavy on the staircase as I entered my bedroom and pulled my suitcase from the closet. "This is ridiculous." Mom stood in the doorway watching me place folded clothes into the suitcase. "You can't just leave." "Who's going to take care of the house?" Dad demanded, his priorities crystal clear. "We have the charity gala next weekend. The guest rooms need to be prepared." "I'm sure you can figure it out," I said, continuing to pack methodically. "Or hire someone, with actual wages this time." Mom moved suddenly, slamming my suitcase shut and nearly catching my fingers. "You're not going anywhere. This family crisis needs to be managed properly." Her voice dropped to a threatening whisper. "If you leave now, Don't expect to be welcomed back when this inheritance fantasy falls apart. I won't need to come back, I stated with more confidence than I felt. That's the whole point. Dad stepped closer, his expression shifting to one I recognized from childhood, the disappointed father routine that had once been so effective at controlling me. Your grandfather would be ashamed of how you're treating your parents, he said solemnly. Is this how we raised you? To abandon family at the first sign of conflict? The mention of Grandpa ignited something fierce inside me. Don't you dare use him against me. Grandpa knew exactly what was happening in this house. That's why he did what he did. I reopened the suitcase and continued packing, adding my hidden portfolio of photographs and the few personal mementos I'd managed to accumulate despite my parents' minimalist preferences for my space. Mom's strategy changed again, tears suddenly welling in her eyes. Madison, please. We're your parents. We love you. Everything we've done has been for your own good. Asking me to cook and clean occasionally would have been reasonable, I acknowledged, zipping the suitcase closed. Turning me into your full-time unpaid housekeeper was exploitation. I lifted the suitcase from the bed, but Mom moved quickly to the bedroom door, physically blocking the exit. You're not leaving this house, she stated flatly, all pretense of tears vanishing. I set the suitcase down, suddenly exhausted by the drama. I'm 26 years old. You can't actually stop me. Watch us, Dad growled, moving to stand beside Mom in the doorway. For a surreal moment, we stood in a deadlock, me with my packed suitcase, them blocking my path to freedom. Then, with deliberate movements, Mom removed her key ring from her purse and dangled it. Your car is in our name, she reminded me with a cold smile. The insurance, the registration, all ours. You won't be taking it anywhere. I hadn't considered this complication. The old Honda I drove had been given to me for my 21st birthday, but like everything else, it came with strings attached. The title remained in their name, ensuring another point of control. I'll call a rideshare, I said, reaching for my phone. Dad moved with surprising speed, grabbing my arm as I tried to step around them. Madison, enough. You're being hysterical and ungrateful. This stops now. His grip tightened painfully around my wrist. In all the years of emotional manipulation, they had never resorted to physical restraint. The shock of it must have shown on my face because his grip loosened slightly, though he didn't let go. Let go of me, I said quietly, my heart pounding. You're hurting me. Richard, Mom hissed, glancing toward the hallway window where the neighbor's house was visible. Not where someone might see. Those words, the concern not for hurting me but for being seen doing it, crystallized everything wrong with my family dynamic. In that moment, I knew I couldn't spend another night in this house. Help! I shouted suddenly, loudly enough to carry through the open window. Help me! Dad released my arm as if burned, stepping back. Have you lost your mind? Madison. Mom looked horrified. The neighbors will hear. That's the idea, I confirmed, moving quickly to grab my suitcase and push past them while they were momentarily stunned by my unprecedented behavior. I hurried down the stairs, my parents close behind, their protests growing more frantic. In the kitchen, Mom made a desperate move, grabbing my car keys from the hook by the door. You're not taking this car, she stated again, clutching the keys to her chest. Fine. I pulled out my phone and quickly ordered a rideshare. I'll be gone in 5 minutes. Dad planted himself in front of the door. If you leave now, don't bother coming back. Ever. The doorbell rang, startling all of us. Through the decorative glass panels, I could see our next-door neighbor Mrs. Chen standing on the porch. Everything okay in there? She called through the door. I heard shouting. Mom's face transformed instantly into a mask of pleasant surprise. She shouldered Dad aside and opened the door partway. Oh, Mrs. Chen, how kind of you to check on us, she said with a brittle smile. We're just having a family discussion after my father-in-law's funeral. Emotions running high, you understand. Mrs. Chen's eyes moved past Mom to where I stood with my suitcase, then to the reddening mark on my wrist where Dad had grabbed me. "Madison," she asked directly, ignoring Mom's attempts to control the conversation. "Are you all right?" The simple question, the first time in years someone had asked about my well-being in this house, brought tears to my eyes. "I need to leave, but they won't let me take my car," I explained, my voice shaking slightly. "I've called a rideshare, but I can drive you," Mrs. Chen offered immediately. "My car's right in the driveway." "This is a private family matter," Dad interjected, stepping forward. "We appreciate your concern, but I'd like to go with Mrs. Chen," I said firmly, meeting my neighbor's concerned gaze. "Thank you." Mom's fingers dug into my arm as I tried to move past her to the door. "Madison, you're making a scene. Mrs. Chen doesn't need to be involved in this." "Let go of her," Mrs. Chen said, her normally soft voice suddenly steely. "Or I'll call the police right now." The threat of police involvement, of public scandal, was the one thing my status-conscious parents couldn't bear. Mom released my arm, her face a mask of barely contained fury. "You'll regret this," she whispered as I moved past her with my suitcase. "The only thing I regret," I replied, loud enough for Mrs. Chen to hear, "is not leaving years ago." In the sanctuary of Mrs. Chen's car, as we pulled away from the house that had been my prison, my phone began buzzing with incoming texts and calls. I silenced it without looking, knowing exactly what kind of emotional manipulation would be waiting. "Are you really okay?" Mrs. Chen asked as we drove, her kind eyes occasionally checking on me in the rearview mirror. "No," I admitted honestly. "But I think I will be." Later that night, alone in Grandpa's house, my house now, I finally looked at my phone. 27 text messages and 13 missed calls, all from my parents. The texts ranged from angry accusations, "How dare you involve the neighbors in our private business," to guilt-inducing laments, "After all we've sacrificed for you," to desperate bargaining, "Come home and we'll discuss adjusting your responsibilities." The last message, sent just minutes before, simply read, "This isn't over." Sitting in Grandpa's familiar living room, surrounded by his books and the photographs he'd treasured, I felt both terrified and exhilarated. For the first time in my adult life, I was making my own decisions, free from their control. Whatever came next, the legal battles, the emotional warfare, I would face it on my own terms. I reached for my phone and called the one person I knew would understand. "Lily? It's Madison. I need a friend right now." The morning after I fled my parents' house, I met with Thomas Bennett in his downtown office. The space, with its leather chairs and wood-paneled walls, exuded the quiet confidence I desperately needed to borrow. "They'll contest the will," I said, clutching my coffee cup. "They made that very clear." Thomas nodded, unsurprised. "Your grandfather anticipated this. That's why he was so meticulous in documenting his decisions and his concerns about your situation." He opened a large file on his desk. "William came to me about 2 years ago, deeply troubled by what he was observing in your home environment. We began building a case to support his estate planning decisions." 2 years? I set down my cup, stunned. He was planning this for that long? "Your grandfather was thorough," Thomas explained, spreading out various documents. He kept a journal documenting his observations during his visits. He collected statements from neighbors like Mrs. Chen who had witnessed concerning interactions. He even hired a private investigator to document the hours you spent on household labor versus your parents' contributions. The extent of Grandpa's secret campaign to free me was overwhelming. While I'd been folding laundry and preparing dinner parties, he had been meticulously building an escape route for me. "The most compelling evidence," Thomas continued, "is the financial documentation. Your grandfather obtained records showing your parents claimed you as a dependent on their taxes while simultaneously treating you as an unpaid household manager. There's also evidence they monitored and controlled your bank accounts well into your adulthood. Will it be enough?" I asked, anxiety churning in my stomach. "In my professional opinion, yes. But I won't sugarcoat this, Madison. They'll fight dirty. They'll likely claim you manipulated William, that he wasn't mentally competent when he changed his will. They might even suggest improper influence. My chest tightened. What do we do? We let them make their claims, Thomas said with quiet confidence. And then we dismantle them with evidence. William left nothing to chance. True to Thomas's prediction, the legal notice arrived 3 days later. My parents were formally contesting the will, claiming undue influence and questioning Grandpa's mental capacity. They had hired Preston Blackwell, a notoriously aggressive attorney known for his scorched-earth approach to family estate disputes. The following weeks were a crash course in independence and resilience. While the legal proceedings gathered momentum, I began the process of truly living on my own for the first time. Grandpa's house, my house now, was a modest 3-bedroom colonial that felt palatial after my cramped bedroom at my parents'. I spent the first few days just wandering through rooms, marveling at the freedom to exist without constant demands. I could leave dishes in the sink overnight. I could sleep past 6 a.m. I could eat cereal for dinner if I wanted to. These small rebellions might seem trivial to most adults, but for me, they were revolutionary acts of self-determination. Each decision made without seeking permission or fearing criticism was a tiny reclamation of my autonomy. As I settled in, I began discovering more evidence of Grandpa's preparations. In his study, behind a row of law books, I found a sealed envelope with my name on it. Inside was another letter, more detailed than the one at the will reading. My dearest Maddie, it began in his familiar handwriting. If you're reading this, then my plan worked, and you're finally free of Richard and Eleanor's control. I've watched for years as they slowly erased the vibrant, creative girl I adored, replacing her with an obedient shadow afraid to make her own choices. It broke my heart to see what they were doing to you, and my greatest regret is not intervening sooner. Tears blurred my vision as I continued reading. Grandpa explained how he had first noticed the troubling dynamic when I was in high school, how he had consulted experts about emotional abuse and exploitation, how he had methodically built a case to ensure his final gift to me couldn't be taken away. I've arranged for you to meet with Jessica Winters, the letter continued. She's a renowned photography mentor who owes me a favor from years ago. Your talent deserves to be nurtured, Maddie. Don't let fear hold you back any longer. At the bottom of the letter was a phone number. With trembling fingers, I dialed it the next day. Jessica Winters turned out to be a celebrated photographer whose work I had admired in magazines without knowing her name. Our first meeting at a downtown cafe was intimidating, her critical eye assessing my amateur portfolio with unnerving intensity. William said you had raw talent, she said finally, closing my portfolio. He wasn't wrong. But you need technical training, experience, and most importantly, confidence. Are you willing to work harder than you ever have? It was a strange question for someone who had spent years working from dawn until midnight managing an entire household. Yes, I answered without hesitation. I'm ready. With Jessica's guidance, I enrolled in an intensive photography program at the local art institute, using part of my inheritance as Grandpa had intended. For the first time, I was pursuing education for myself, not to fulfill my parents' expectations or to fit around their needs. Meanwhile, the legal battle intensified. My parents' attorney filed motion after motion, demanding psychological evaluations, questioning the validity of Grandpa's documentation, and attempting to paint me as a manipulative granddaughter who had taken advantage of an elderly man's affection. The first time I saw my parents in court, 2 weeks after leaving their house, was jarring. Mom had lost weight, her usually immaculate appearance slightly frayed around the edges. Dad looked older somehow, the lines around his mouth deeper. For a brief moment, I felt a pang of guilt, the ingrained response to their distress that they had cultivated in me for years. Then I remembered the mark on my wrist from Dad's grip, the decades of exploitation disguised as family obligation, and the guilt evaporated. Their tactics grew increasingly desperate as the case proceeded. They began spreading rumors among family members and their social circle. I'd had a mental breakdown, I'd been influenced by a cult, I was romantically involved with Grandpa's attorney. The absurdity of these claims would have been laughable if they weren't so painful. Most relatives kept their distance, unwilling to take sides publicly. But to my surprise, Aunt Patricia became my steadfast ally, returning from California to testify about the family dynamic she had observed over the years. "I stayed away because I couldn't bear to watch what they were doing to you," she confessed over dinner at my house. "I should have done more. I'm sorry, Madison. My parents' most devastating tactic was attempting to sabotage my new relationships. They contacted the Art Institute, suggesting I was mentally unstable and potentially dangerous. They approached Jessica with concerns about my fragile state, urging her to reconsider mentoring me. They even tried to turn Mrs. Chen against me, implying I had exaggerated the confrontation the night I left. These efforts largely backfired, serving only to reveal the extent of their controlling behavior to others. But the emotional toll was significant. Each new attack reopened wounds that had barely begun to heal. "They won't stop," I told Lily during one of her weekend visits. We were sitting on the back porch, the evening light casting long shadows across the lawn. "It's like they can't accept that I'm not under their control anymore." "That's exactly it," Lily said, her psychology background evident in her insight. This was never about love or family. It was about control. And some people will burn everything down rather than lose that. The most painful confrontation came unexpectedly, outside the courthouse after a particularly contentious hearing. I was walking to my car, a used Subaru I'd purchased with my own money, a small act of independence that brought me disproportionate joy, when Mom approached alone. "Madison," she called, her voice lacking its usual imperious tone. "Please, can we talk?" Against my better judgment, I stopped. "What is it?" "This has gone far enough," she said, her eyes darting around as if checking whether anyone could overhear. "You've made your point. You're hurting your father deeply, you know. His blood pressure is through the roof." The familiar stab of guilt twisted in my chest. "I'm sorry he's unwell," I said carefully. "But this isn't about punishing you." "Then what is it about?" she demanded, her composure slipping. "Revenge? Money? Is that what matters to you now?" "It's about being allowed to live my own life," I explained, feeling strangely calm in the face of her agitation. "About not being treated as property. We gave you everything." The familiar refrain, her voice rising. "A beautiful home, the best education." "You gave me room and board in exchange for being your full-time housekeeper," I interrupted. "That's not parental love. That's exploitation." Her face contorted with rage, the mask of maternal concern dropping entirely. "You ungrateful, selfish," she stepped closer, finger jabbing toward my face. "Do you have any idea what this is doing to our reputation? The Hendersons uninvited us from their annual gala. 30 years of social connections ruined because of your dramatics." And there it was, the true source of her distress. Not concern for me, not even the money, but the social embarrassment of having their carefully constructed facade crumble. "I'm not coming back," I said firmly, stepping away. "No matter what you say or do." "We'll see about that," she hissed, her eyes cold. "When you fail, and you will fail, Madison, don't come crawling back expecting open arms." As she stalked away, I realized something important: her threats no longer held power over me. The fear and obligation that had kept me tethered for so long were dissolving, replaced by something new and unfamiliar: self-confidence. That night, alone in my house, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, really looking at myself perhaps for the first time in years. The dark circles under my eyes were fading. My posture was straightening from its habitual apologetic slouch. I was changing, inside and out. "You were right, Grandpa," I whispered to the empty house. "I am worth more than what I can do for others." The legal battle continued, draining and difficult, but I was no longer fighting just to escape my parents. I was fighting for the future Grandpa had believed I deserved, one where I could discover who Madison Hayes really was, beyond the role of family servant. And with each passing day of freedom, I was beginning to believe I might actually win. The final hearing was scheduled for a Wednesday in late January, almost 3 months after Grandpa's funeral. The courthouse loomed imposing against the winter sky as I climbed the stone steps, Thomas Bennett beside me, Aunt Patricia and Lily following close behind. "Remember," Thomas said quietly as we approached the heavy wooden doors, "Judge Watkins has reviewed all the evidence already. Today is about final arguments and testimony. Stay calm, answer honestly, and trust the process." Inside, the courtroom was smaller than I'd imagined from television dramas, the wooden benches polished by decades of anxious hands. My parents were already seated at the plaintiff's table, their attorney Preston Blackwell arranging documents with theatrical precision. Mom wore a conservative navy dress, her hair styled to project maternal dignity. Dad had chosen his most serious charcoal suit, the one reserved for meeting important clients. As we took our places at the defense table, Mom's eyes briefly met mine before sliding away. In that momentary connection, I saw something unexpected, not just anger, but fear. For perhaps the first time, she wasn't certain of victory. Judge Watkins entered, a stern-faced woman in her 60s whose reputation for no-nonsense efficiency had become evident through our previous hearings. After the formalities, she addressed the courtroom. "I've reviewed the extensive filings in this case," she began, her tone making clear her thoughts on the volume of paperwork both sides had generated. "Today, I want to hear directly from the primary parties involved before making my final ruling." My stomach tightened. I had provided written statements but hadn't yet testified in person. The prospect of speaking against my parents, publicly declaring their mistreatment, made my mouth go dry with anxiety. Preston Blackwell rose first, smoothing his expensive tie. "Your Honor, we intend to demonstrate that William Hayes was subject to undue influence in his final years, resulting in an irrational distribution of his estate that disregarded his only son in favor of his granddaughter." He gestured toward me with calculated dismay. "Madison Hayes, while undoubtedly a loving granddaughter, exploited her grandfather's affection and declining health to secure an inheritance that rightfully should be shared among immediate family members." Thomas remained unruffled. "Your Honor, we will show that William Hayes was of sound mind and made deliberate choices based on his direct observations of his granddaughter's treatment within the family home. Far from being influenced by Madison, it was William who orchestrated these arrangements to ensure her welfare after witnessing years of concerning behavior by the plaintiffs." The testimony began with my father taking the stand, projecting the image of the wounded son deprived of his rightful inheritance. "My father and I were very close," he claimed, his voice carefully modulated to convey restrained emotion. "We spoke frequently, and he never expressed any concerns about Madison's living situation. Quite the contrary, he often commented on how fortunate she was to have such supportive parents." Preston guided him through a series of questions designed to portray our family as loving and normal, with me as a troubled young woman who had manipulated Grandpa during a vulnerable time after Grandma's death. "Madison became very attached to my father after my mother's passing," Dad explained, glancing sympathetically in my direction. "We encouraged the relationship, of course, but in retrospect, we should have been more alert to how she was influencing him." "And how would you describe your daughter's role in your household?" Preston asked. "Madison contributed to household chores, as any family member should," Dad replied smoothly. "We believed in teaching responsibility. Perhaps she found these expectations challenging, but they were designed to prepare her for adulthood." My hands clenched under the table as he rewrote our family history, transforming years of exploitation into beneficial life lessons. Mom's testimony followed a similar pattern, depicting herself as the concerned mother whose daughter had inexplicably turned against the family. "Madison was always a sensitive child," she said, dabbing at dry eyes with a tissue. "When she began spending so much time with William after my mother-in-law's death, we were supportive, thinking it was helping them both with grief. We never imagined she was poisoning him against us." Thomas's cross-examinations were surgical and devastating. "Mrs. Hayes," he asked, his tone conversational, "could you describe a typical day for Madison in your household over the past year?" Mom hesitated, clearly calculating the safest response. "She had normal responsibilities. Helping with meals, tidying up. Standard family contributions." "I see. And what were your contributions to household management?" I beg your pardon? Mom's surprise seemed genuine. Your contributions, Thomas repeated. What household responsibilities did you personally manage? Well, I supervised, of course. I work full-time in a demanding executive position. Madison was home more often. Because she could only attend college part-time, correct? Due to her household obligations? She chose her own schedule, Mom insisted, a note of defensiveness creeping into her voice. Thomas nodded thoughtfully, then changed direction. Mrs. Hayes, are you familiar with a text message you sent to Madison on October 3rd of last year? Mom's posture stiffened. I sent many texts. I couldn't possibly remember specific ones. Thomas handed a document to the judge, then placed a copy before Mom. This message reads, "The kitchen is a disgrace. I have the Wilsons coming for dinner and nothing is prepared. Get home immediately and fix this disaster, or don't bother coming home at all." Madison was in the middle of a final exam when she received this. Did you consider her education a priority? The color drained from Mom's face as she stared at the printed message. This is taken out of context. It was a stressful day. One of many, it seems, Thomas noted, producing more document pages. I have here a collection of similar messages spanning the past 3 years. Would you like me to continue reading them aloud? When it was finally my turn to testify, my heart hammered so violently I feared the microphone might pick it up. I took a deep breath, remembering Grandpa's advice whenever I faced something frightening, just tell the truth, Maddie. Your truth has power. Madison, Thomas began gently, could you describe for the court your typical daily routine while living with your parents? With steady words, I recounted the reality of my existence, waking before dawn to prepare breakfasts, cleaning throughout the day, managing household vendors, cooking dinners, handling laundry, and fitting in part-time classes and study when possible. How many hours per week would you estimate you spent on household management? Thomas asked. About 60 to 70, I answered, hearing the gallery's murmur of surprise. More when they entertained, which was frequent. And were you compensated for this work? I was allowed to live in the house, I explained. But I didn't receive payment. My bank account was joint with my mother, who monitored all transactions. My car was in their name. Even my phone was on their family plan. What happened when you attempted to reduce your household responsibilities or pursue your own interests? The memory of countless confrontations surfaced. There were consequences. Criticism, guilt, threats to withdraw financial support. When I was selected for a photography workshop in high school, they refused to let me attend because the guest bathroom needed cleaning that weekend. Thomas nodded sympathetically. Did you ever discuss this situation with your grandfather? Yes, I confirmed. He was the only person I could talk to honestly. He encouraged me to stand up for myself, but I was afraid. I had nowhere else to go, no financial independence. Preston's cross-examination was aggressive, designed to provoke an emotional reaction that would undermine my credibility. Isn't it true, Ms. Hayes, he began, pacing before the witness stand, that you deliberately cultivated a special relationship with your grandfather to secure financial advantage? No, I replied simply. I loved him. He was the only family member who treated me like a person with value beyond what I could do for others. Yet you accepted his money readily enough, Preston noted with a raised eyebrow. A substantial inheritance that bypassed your parents entirely. Convenient, wouldn't you say? I didn't know about the inheritance until after his death, I explained. Grandpa never mentioned money to me. But you must have suspected, Preston pressed. An elderly man, living alone, showing you special attention. Surely you considered the potential financial benefit of this relationship? The insinuation made my stomach turn. Our relationship wasn't transactional. That's not how love works in healthy families. The subtle emphasis on healthy wasn't lost on the judge, whose expression remained impassive but attentive. The pivotal moment came with the surprise witness Thomas had saved for last, Mrs. Winters, my mother's former college roommate and longtime friend. Mrs. Winters, Thomas began after the preliminary questions. How long have you known the Hayes family? Nearly 30 years, she replied. Eleanor and I were roommates in college and remained close. I've been a regular guest in their home since before Madison was born. And how would you characterize the family dynamic, particularly regarding Madison's role in the household? Mrs. Winters glanced uncomfortably at my mother. Eleanor was always particular about her home. High standards. As Madison got older, those expectations increasingly fell on her shoulders. Could you provide specific examples of what you observed? Last Thanksgiving, Mrs. Winters began, I arrived early to help with preparations. Madison had been cooking since dawn. She served everyone, cleared plates, washed dishes. She never sat down to eat with us. When she finally took a brief break, Eleanor called her back to refill water glasses that were barely touched. Mrs. Winters continued, describing incident after incident she had witnessed over the years. What troubled me most was how it evolved from normal chores to something excessive. By the time Madison was in college, she wasn't being treated like a daughter. She was being treated like staff. Did you ever express these concerns to Richard or Eleanor Hayes? Mrs. Winters nodded. Once, about 2 years ago. Eleanor dismissed it, saying Madison needed structure and responsibility. Richard changed the subject entirely. After that, my invitations to their home became less frequent. My mother's face had turned to stone, her eyes fixed on her former friend with unmistakable betrayal. During Preston's cross-examination, he attempted to paint Mrs. Winters as a jealous friend with a vendetta. Isn't it true that your own daughter was passed over for a scholarship that Madison received in high school? Might that color your perception of this family? Mrs. Winters appeared genuinely confused. My daughter attended school in another district. They weren't even competing for the same opportunities. I've always been fond of Madison. The final blow came during my mother's redirect testimony. Frustrated by the mounting evidence against them, she lost the careful composure she had maintained throughout the proceedings. Madison was always difficult, she snapped when Thomas questioned the punitive nature of the workload assigned to me. Dreamy, impractical, constantly needing direction. Everything we did was for her own good. Including requiring her to miss classes to prepare for your dinner parties? Thomas asked mildly. Those dinner parties advanced her father's career. Everything we did benefited this family. By family, you mean yourself and your husband? Or did Madison's benefits factor into these decisions as well? She lived in a beautiful home. She had every advantage. Mom's voice rose sharply. If she had to work for it, so what? Nothing in life is free, she needed to learn that. So you admit the living arrangement was conditional on her labor? Thomas clarified. Of course it was. Mom exclaimed, frustration overcoming caution. Everyone contributes in a household. Madison just had more time than we did. Someone had to maintain our standards. The courtroom fell silent. In her indignation, my mother had confirmed exactly what we had been arguing, that my role had been that of a servant, not a daughter, with basic necessities contingent on meeting their demands. Judge Watkins's expression revealed nothing as she called for closing arguments. Preston attempted damage control, emphasizing family loyalty and the parent's right to establish household expectations. Thomas simply reiterated the overwhelming evidence of exploitation and control, concluding with a quote from Grandpa's journal, "A parent's duty is to raise a child to independence, not to servitude." After a brief recess, Judge Watkins delivered her ruling. This court has heard extensive testimony regarding the family dynamic in the Hayes household, she began, her tone measured but firm. While parents have considerable latitude in establishing household responsibilities for adult children living at home, the evidence presented describes a situation that exceeded reasonable parental authority and veered into exploitation. She reviewed the documentation Grandpa had collected, the testimony of witnesses, and the inadvertent admissions from my parents themselves. William Hayes was of sound mind when he executed his will, she continued. The court finds no evidence of undue influence. Rather, the evidence suggests he acted out of legitimate concern for his granddaughter's welfare after observing a troubling pattern of behavior by her parents. She looked directly at my parents. This court upholds the will in its entirety. Furthermore, given the testimony regarding the plaintiff's attempts to interfere with the defendant's new living situation, I am granting a restraining order preventing Richard and Eleanor Hayes from approaching Madison's residence or place of education without prior written permission. The finality in her voice left no room for argument. This ruling is effective immediately. Court is adjourned. The gallery erupted in murmurs as the judge departed. I sat frozen, the verdict washing over me in waves of relief and vindication. Thomas squeezed my shoulder gently. "It's over," he said quietly. "You won." Across the room, my parents huddled with Preston, their expressions thunderous. Mom's gaze found mine across the divide, her eyes communicating what words never would, that in her mind, this betrayal was unforgivable. Dad refused to look at me at all, his shoulders slumped in defeat. As we exited the courtroom, reporters who had been following the unusually dramatic probate case called out questions. Thomas deftly guided me through them with brief, dignified responses. In the momentary chaos, I caught a glimpse of my parents slipping out a side door, heads bowed, avoiding the public attention they had always so carefully cultivated. "How are you feeling?" Lily asked as we descended the courthouse steps. I considered the question carefully, sorting through the tangle of emotions. Relieved. Sad. Free. I took a deep breath of the winter air. Mostly free. That evening, we gathered at my house, Thomas, Aunt Patricia, Mrs. Chen, Jessica, Lily, and several other supporters who had stood by me through the ordeal. It wasn't a celebration exactly, but a quiet acknowledgement that a difficult chapter had closed. "Your grandfather would be proud," Thomas said, raising his glass in a toast. "Not just of the outcome, but of your courage throughout this process." As my friends spoke of future plans and new beginnings, I felt Grandpa's presence in the room, in the books on the shelves, the photographs on the walls, and most of all, in the freedom he had fought to secure for me. His final gift hadn't been the money or the house, but the chance to discover who I could become when no longer defined by servitude. 6 months after the court ruling, spring had transformed both the landscape and my life. Cherry blossoms dotted the tree outside my bedroom window, my real bedroom now, redecorated to reflect my own taste rather than someone else's expectations. The pale blue walls and photography prints had replaced Grandpa's more traditional decor, though I'd kept his bookshelves and leather armchair as comforting reminders of his presence. The house had gradually evolved from Grandpa's place to truly my own. Each paint color selection, furniture arrangement, and decorative choice represented another small step in discovering my preferences after years of suppressing them. Some days the freedom to choose was almost overwhelming, a lifetime of deferring to others' decisions had left me uncertain of my own desires. But the process of discovery, however tentative, was exhilarating. My photography career had progressed from aspiration to reality. Under Jessica's mentorship, I had developed technical skills and artistic confidence that transformed my work. My first gallery showing was scheduled for the following month, a collection exploring themes of confinement and liberation that drew directly from my experiences. "You found your voice," Jessica had commented during our last review session, studying a particularly powerful image of a bird cage with an open door. "These aren't just technically proficient anymore. They're saying something important." Financial independence brought practical challenges I'd never anticipated. Managing bills, home maintenance, and investment decisions required a steep learning curve after years of having only limited control over my personal finances. Thomas had introduced me to a financial advisor who patiently explained concepts my parents had deliberately kept mysterious to maintain control. "Most young adults learn this gradually," she'd explained kindly during our first meeting. "You're catching up on a decade of financial education all at once. Be patient with yourself." The inheritance itself remained mostly untouched beyond education expenses and necessary home repairs. The monthly allowance Grandpa had structured provided comfortable living expenses while ensuring the bulk of the estate remained protected as I learned financial management. His foresight continued to amaze me. He had anticipated not only my needs but my vulnerabilities as well. Perhaps the most significant transformation was internal. Weekly therapy sessions had helped me recognize and begin healing from years of exploitation disguised as family obligation. Dr. Marshall, a specialist in family trauma, guided me through unpacking patterns I had normalized for so long. "What your parents did is called parentification," she explained during an early session. "They reversed the caretaking role, making you responsible for their needs rather than them meeting yours. It's a form of emotional abuse that often goes unrecognized." Those words, emotional abuse, had been difficult to accept initially. In my mind, abuse meant violence or obvious cruelty, not the subtle erosion of autonomy I had experienced. Yet naming what had happened provided a framework for understanding my experiences and beginning to heal. Establishing healthy boundaries became a central focus of my recovery. I learned to recognize the difference between genuine reciprocity and exploitation in relationships, to identify when my people-pleasing tendencies emerged from fear rather than genuine generosity. "No is a complete sentence," Dr. Marshall reminded me often. "You don't need to justify your boundaries to make them valid." This lesson proved particularly valuable as extended family members began tentatively reaching out after the court case publicity faded. Some had witnessed my parents' treatment of me for years without intervening. Others had been kept at a distance and were genuinely unaware of the household dynamic. Aunt Patricia became a consistent presence in my life, visiting monthly from California and calling regularly between visits. "I knew things weren't right," she admitted during a long conversation on my porch swing. But Richard shut down any attempt to discuss it. "After a while, I just stopped coming around because I couldn't bear to watch. I should have tried harder to help you." "You're here now," I assured her, finding forgiveness easier than expected. That matters. Other relationships required more careful navigation. Cousins who had been fed my parents' version of events approached with skepticism that slowly gave way to understanding. Family friends who had witnessed my role as household manager without questioning it now expressed belated concern, their guilt often manifesting as awkward overcompensation. "I brought you something," Mrs. Wilson said during an unexpected visit, holding out a small gift bag. She had been one of my mother's closest friends and a frequent dinner party guest. "It's not much, just,"